Welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism, folks. Got a very, very special treat for you all today. I am joined today by the leader of the ALBA party, Alex Salmond. I don't need to, for once, do an introduction or tell you who I've got. The man here speaks for himself. Alec, welcome to Through a Scottish Prism. Welcome.
Well, I'm delighted to be in Through the Prism. I've just finished our Declaration of Scotland press conference, so I'm in full press conference mode, but delighted to be on the Prism.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And can I just say, there's certain traditions in the Prism, and I have to do this. Right at the beginning, I have to give a shout out to the boys from the Dog and Duck, which is the most famous online pub ever, which began during lockdown. And if I don't mention them, I get grief. They send their best. I can see you're thriving, but how are you enjoying being back on the campaign trail?
Oh, well, it's very unusual, isn't it? I mean, this is, I'm here in Ellon in Aberdeenshire in our broadcasting centre, which we now have properly lit and free of technical problems. But it's an interesting way to campaign. It's quite different from anything anybody's ever experienced before. I mean, we actually had to turn a photographer away today because they would be in breach of the COVID regulations because we had we had enough in. So we had the, chairs distance out for them, and we had to turn. Mind you, it was the Daily Mail photographer, so it wasn't too great a hardship. Sure. But we had to come in first come, first served basis. So everything's different. But, you've got to adapt to the new circumstances. And I am not certain that this, COVID lockdown election is not a format that might suit an emerging, growing party like ALBA. I actually think we'll be better able to adapt to the conditions than perhaps some of the old, slow-moving, established parties. I mean, you think of them like the dinosaurs evolving away because they couldn't adapt to the new world. I think ALBA will be better at doing that. So it's different. But it's inciting and it's engaging, and let's see how we go with it.
Indeed, I would like to compliment you on behalf of not just myself, but I think all the new media that you have actually embraced the new media, and you're pointing out in these times. I think it's a wise way to go. We have a good reach, especially to the core vote of the independent supporters. But one of the things I'd like to ask you is the message of the campaign is obviously we want a supermajority. Can you tell the listeners and viewers the difference between having a simple majority as opposed to the advantages of having a supermajority?
Well, I can illustrate that in two ways. Firstly, on my own experience when I was First Minister, if you take the years between 2007 and 2011, I had some great ideas, not for independence, because if that wasn't going to be conceded, or a referendum wasn't going to be conceded. But some great ideas for progressing Scotland's case. And of course, we did that. We had various white papers and publications and proposals for freeway referendums. And I was all the time trying to negotiate with first Gordon Brown and then David Cameron about how to get additional powers for the Scots Parliament. And I had some fantastic proposals. And each of them foundered on the problem that I was negotiating with one eye behind my back, because in the Scots Parliament, there was a unionist majority. There was 49 MSPs supporting independence and the rest were unionists. So that severely constrained. So the government between 2007 and 2011 did some amazing things. If you remember, Lord Foulkes of that ilk said that we were cheating because we were trying to become popular. So it was an extraordinary government in many ways, but it couldn't progress the case for Scottish independence. Then, of course, in 2011, all changed. But even in 2011, in order to persuade David Cameron to give us a Section 30 referendum, I had all sorts of feints and manoeuvres and making sure they didn't know what we were going to do if they didn't give us what we wanted in the negotiations and culminated in the Edinburgh Agreement. But it was a huge difference, the fact that we could say, look, we've got an overall majority and a mandate. Now, think of that now, and think of the lack of progress. And let's face it, there have been total lack of progress in the last 7 years. and compare that with where Scotland could be if there was not just a bare majority of independents supporting MSPs, but a supermajority. In other words, not 70, but 80, as the Sunday Times poll would suggest, or perhaps 90, which I believe is well within reach. And 90 MSPs supporting independence means that there's only 30 supporting the union. And a quick arithmetic calculation of which BarrheadBoy is famous, it means that's an independence majority of about 60. So that would be a totally different perspective. Because what you're engaged in is a battle for legitimacy. The perception of legitimacy, first and foremost by the Scottish people, second by the English people and the Westminster government, and thirdly by international opinion. And if you're sitting on an independent supermajority of potentially 60 MSPs in the Scots Parliament, it makes all the difference in the world. Does that in itself guarantee either an opportunity to vote for independence or indeed independence itself? No, it doesn't. It requires will, determination, and statecraft. These are the things which have not been obvious or in abundance over the last 7 years. And of course, I've got great respect, incidentally, for the green politics, for the Green New Deal. I enabled Scotland to reach its present position in renewable energy by taking a lot of decisions, some of which weren't all that popular, like the electricity grid from down the spine of Scotland, which makes possible securing the renewable assets from many parts of Scotland. That wasn't a popular thing to do. I had to persuade some of the SNP MSPs that there was a national interest which was greater than their supposed local opposition. Mind you, the ones who told me they were going to lose their seats as a result, all in 2011 held them with resounding majorities. But nonetheless, it wasn't a simple or easy decision, but one that I made and one that was worth making. However, despite my admiration for green politics, and there was an estimable lady in the first leaders' debate that I watched last Tuesday, but I also reckoned, and unless I missed it, it's the case that she did not utter the word independence once in that entire hour-long debate, despite the fact there was at least 2, perhaps 3 questions where the independence issue was relevant. She actually managed to go through the entire debate without uttering the word independence. Now, you can do many things in politics, many things, but you're not going to enable an independence majority or persuade people to vote for independence or to believe in independence if you're frightened of the word. And so I don't think in many of the people who are ostensibly independence supporters, there's any real gut enthusiasm who see independence as an overriding priority, as I do, and as many, many people watching this blog and this broadcast most certainly do.
You've always been innovative, should we say, since the days, all times, but especially with Hollywood, from using the list to the advantage of the SNP and now hopefully to ALBA. But you're the famous Alex Salmond for First Minister. But in 2007 and 2011, it was a completely different ballgame. Critics now are going to say, oh, we're gaming the system. I don't accept that. I believe it's tactics and tactical voting, because in 2002, the conditions were completely different. Labour were still a force in the constituencies, but it is a completely different ball game now on the list, is it not?
Look, firstly, in terms of what the system is and what the system isn't, any political system should be operated into the maximum positive advantage of the party who's operating in it. My dad was a fanatical golfer, and he used to, when I put the ball in the rough or in some other ridiculous position it shouldn't have been, and was moaning and whining and gurning about it, my dad would always growl at me, "Play the ball as it lies, Alec. Play the ball as it lies." And it was sound advice for golf when I was a youngster, and it's very sound advice for political systems when I'm an adult. You play the ball as it lies. And we have the DeHont regional list system. which many people criticise, but a lot more criticise first past the post. And for those who say you're gaming the system, what's Boris Johnson doing with 40% of the vote and the majority of 90 in the Westminster Parliament? So the degree of hypocrisy from these people is overwhelming. What I find more surprising than the anguished howls of the Tories and other unionists, and they are anguished and they are howls, is the people who ostensibly are independent supporters who says, we don't want a big independence majority in the Scots Parliament. We don't want a situation where we have lots of independents supporting MSPs. And I have to say, why on earth should that be? Why would any independent supporter not want to have as many as possible MSPs supporting independence in the Scots Parliament? Or to bring it down to cases, why would any independent supporter rather have Murdo Fraser in the Scots Parliament than Alex Salmond? Is there really lots of independent supporters around Scotland who think that Murdo Fraser is such an adornment to the Scots Parliament that we should protect his position at all costs? Or the referee, and this is not an affectation, his name always escapes me, Douglas Ross, that's him, who says that Douglas Ross should be preserved like some endangered species in the Highland list, as opposed to being replaced in the Highland list by an excellent SNP MSP, or in this case, the wonderful ALBA representatives, Kurt Torrance, Craig Berry, Josh Robertson, and Judith Reid. So why should anybody believe that Douglas Ross should be preserved if they're an independent supporter, as opposed to Kurt, Craig, Josh, or Judith? Surely not just ALBA supporters, but SNP supporters, Green supporters, independent supporters, people of no party who want to see a different voice fighting for Scotland would look at Douglas Ross's performance and say, no, Douglas, you've got the red card, and let's bring Kurt, Craig, Josh, or Judith onto the field. Or, better still, let's bring all four onto the field. So I can understand the howls of anguish from our unionist community. What I can't understand is independent supporters not seizing the moment and electing ALBA MSPs. Now, I'm speaking from Ellen in Aberdeenshire. Here, there were 137,000 SNP votes on the list at the last election. They elected 0, big round 0 MSPs. If half of these people and the others who'll support us are to vote ALBA on the list, then Alex Salmond, Heather McLean, Councillor Brian Topping and Dot Jessamine will all be elected from the ALBA party. And I know that they'll make a bigger contribution to Scotland's cause than Murdo Fraser could do in his dreams.
I'll second that. You mentioned today in your speech earlier today, which was inspirational, dare I say, Alec, that this is reinvigorating the 2014 joy. I've never in my life experienced anything like it. I don't think anyone that was involved in it was. But do you genuinely feel that is where we're going and what's happening?
If I had to say, I mean, look, I'm in many ALBA meetings just now. I mean, the party's 10 days old.
Yeah.
So I can't claim to know, any of our 4,500 members we've got already. I can't claim to know all of them in the terms that I used to know folk in the SNP back in the 1990s. But in all of the meetings and online meetings, from the top executive to the candidates to the organisational meetings to here in the Northeast or Zoom meetings on a Sunday that I've encountered, I encountered something which reminds me absolutely of the high summer of the Yes campaign of 2014, when the grassroots campaign took off, lifted the campaign from the rut in which it was stuck, and the campaign almost almost spontaneously, certainly erupting all over the place, all over Scotland. You know, when the wee blue book was out and about, being photocopied, synchronized, printed illicitly across the country. When people were turning up to meetings when they weren't meant to turn up, when meetings were turning up when they weren't meant to be turning up, and all sorts of activity was sprouting all over the place, and 1,000 flowers were blooming in that high summer. In the aftermath of the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, that high summer of the Yes campaign, if I was to describe ALBA in a single phrase, it's the political rebirth in the form of a political party. This is the Yes campaign reborn 7 years later.
And Joyce, and I have to agree with you, the feeling, I have to say, since ALBA came on to us has been just, it is very reminiscent of that, and I hope it continues. Once we get beyond the election on May the 6th, what do you see as the first steps for the supermajority? Because I'm going to say with the supermajority, because I truly believe the Scottish people will not allow this chance to slip through their fingers. So what are the first steps we've got to take as a parliament once we can?
First step, week one, the parliament should mandate the government to open independence negotiations with Westminster, with Whitehall. That instruction must go to the government in week one of the parliament. You've got to start as you've been to go on. And I have so much impatience with those who say, oh, we should wait till the pandemic's over, wait till this happens, wait till the next thing happens, wait till after Brexit, wait for this, wait for that, wait till Jack and Ori comes back on television. No. If independence is the priority we believe, get it started in terms of negotiation. The negotiations are going to take some considerable time, and it's going to require us to move mountains to get Westminster into a democratic and reasonable and fair negotiations. You start as you mean to go on, and you start in week one. And let me just say to people, I'm not talking here about the mainstream media, they'll say what they like, who say, oh, well, we've got to wait till the pandemic's over. Well, obviously, ALBA is bringing forward next week, as you know, the best reconstruction plan, actually the only reconstruction plan I've seen, because nothing in Westminster, and I have to say the Scottish Parliament, that I've seen in economic terms is meeting the scale of the challenge that we now face. I saw Ian Lawson posted a blog last week about Scottish exports. I mean, the falls because of the pandemic and because of Brexit, of course, are catastrophic. You know, it took us years, decades, to build up the quality langoustine market across Europe and elsewhere. We changed the name of the species from Scottish prawns to langoustine. And we got it as the highest quality shellfish you can get in the great restaurants of Europe and beyond, commanding high prices. The price, of course, has collapsed as a result of Brexit and some interruption with the pandemic as well, but mainly as a result of Brexit. So markets which took years to establish. I mean, I signed an agreement, Scott Salmon, in China back in 2011, and that is now a major market for Scott Salmon. So these things have been jeopardized and sacrificed on the altar of stupidity during this pandemic. The idea that we would leave recovery from the pandemic in the same hands as these complete incompetents who've made a mess of things from Westminster is extraordinary. And I can't understand why, I mean, I understand the unionist papers, but I can't understand why anybody who believes in Scottish independence would say this recovery from Brexit is so important, we'll leave it in the hands of these complete ninnies who have exacerbated the economic problems of the pandemic through Brexit and through other monumental incompetence. We are moving into a new world. We have a scale of an economic challenge that requires to be met. There then is the new world post-pandemic. That world is going to change. It must change. It should change. Because anybody who thinks we're going to go blinking into the sunlight for business as usual hasn't understood the lessons from this pandemic. In that new world, Scotland better have a stake, or we're going to be left behind. And we cannot shape a future which is learning the lessons of the pandemic unless we're in a position to do so. Unless any independent supporter watching this broadcast is going to say, let's leave that new world, the changes that are going to have to take place in Scottish society, the changes about equality and who has suffered most from the pandemic, the changes in terms of the nature of the groups in the population who have been borne down upon, leave that to Boris Johnson. You're kidding me on. We have to see independence, not as the solution, but as unlocking the door to the future. And that new world, which is going to emerge post-pandemic, is one that Scotland needs to have the powers if we're going to shape it in the way that people are hoping and expecting. It would be a tragedy. A, if we don't rise to the economic challenge, which we must, but B, if we think it's going back to business as usual. And part of the change that we need is carried through in the independence message.
Would you also agree, Alec, as big a threat? You mentioned that no one's got a plan, an economic plan, and you're absolutely right, Nan. It's delighted to hear that ALBA is going to bring theirs forth. But another huge threat to Scotland, which I believe can only be headed off by a supermajority, is the Internal Market Bill, which is, in my humble opinion, an attack not just on our Parliament, but our entire democracy and the way that the Scottish people operate as we do today. And we must have some kind of defence mechanism against that.
Well, I mean, there's no question we've got to prepare ourselves and the people for the real politique of the world we're moving into. I mean, this is not a choice between Scotland standing still or moving forward to independence. If Scotland attempts to stand still, if we delay the move to independence, we'll actually move backwards, substantially backwards. And the Internal Market Bill is just one piece of evidence of that. It'll be one of many. You know, our opponents, our political foes, the Unionist coalition, they don't intend to let matters lie. They don't intend to let the Scottish Parliament pat it on the head and say, just you go on with that stuff and we won't touch anything that's happened. And they certainly don't intend to fulfill the vow of 2014. What they intend to do is denude and to strip and to remove the powers of the Parliament. They intend to absorb and claim the authority which lay in the European Union, where in many cases, not all, but in many cases, Scotland got a benevolent look. And they intend to centralise that in Whitehall. You know, I was brought up in life to think there was the three great lies in life. You know, darling, I'll respect you in the morning. 2 was the checks and post. And the 3rd is, I'm from the Westminster government and I'm here to help Scotland.
Well said. Can I ask 2 last questions, because our time is running out far too quickly for my liking. But what will you view as a success on Friday the 7th? What would you say is a success for the ALBA party and Scotland? Because I put the 2 together, they are inseparable.
In a sense, ALBA's already been successful because we've injected independence into this election debate. If we hadn't arrived on the scene 10 days ago, then that stupefyingly boring election debate on the BBC last week would be par for the course. Except it wouldn't just be the Green lady who wasn't discussing independence or uttering the I word. Nobody would. Why would they? Because it wouldn't even rate as a serious issue. I mean, there might be a debate about the timing of a referendum, but listen, a referendum isn't independence. You know, as the person who delivered the independence referendum in 2014 to give people the opportunity to vote themselves to freedom, my strategic objective was not to have a referendum. My strategic objective was to deliver independence for the country. The strategy is independence. The tactics could be a referendum, could be many other things, as I was trying to illustrate. So in a way, ALBA's already had a success, but real success, political success that will make a difference, will be parliamentary representation in every area of Scotland. Now, one last story. Gordon Wilson, SNP leader, I had a number of disagreements with Gordon over the years But he did once tell me a great story about him and Harold Wilson. This is Gordon Wilson's story. Between the two parliaments of February and October 74, the SNP elected 7 MPs, including Gordon Wilson. Harold Wilson had a minority government. And Gordon Wilson went up to his namesake in the corridors at Westminster one day and said, you'll be worried about what we're going to do. There's 7 of us now, and you're going to depend on our votes to get through to the autumn. And Harold Wilson said, I'm not in the slightest worried about what you're going to do. You're going to have no choice but to support me, given the measures I'm bringing forward. I'm not in the slightest worried about the 7 of you. What worries me is the 36 second places you've got the length and breadth for Scotland in Labour seats. That's what worries me. So I suspect if ALBA gets into the Parliament, then our impact will be not just in the ALBA MSPs elected, but the very, very certain knowledge that unless the independence case is progressed as it should be with the urgency it requires, then these numbers, whatever they may be, will be multiplied many times over when people next go into the polling station. So ALBA acts as making sure independence is injected into the debate and gaining a parliamentary foothold, but also the prospect of more to come, if, of course, and it's a possibility, we take off during this campaign in the last few weeks, then who knows what we might achieve. And certainly if we can capture that spirit of 2014 of the high summer of the Yes campaign, then we'll take some stopping in this election.
Alec, thank you very much. I'm sad to say we've come to the end of the time. I appreciate, as do my listeners, the time that you've given us. And can I wish you all the best in this coming election and let you know that certainly I and all of my listeners and readers will be rooting for you and ALBA and the supermajority. Thank you very much, Alec. I appreciate it.
And Barrhead, you're the boy.